In today's video, we are going to learn about rate limiting for REST APIs and go ahead to implement it in a NestJS project. Before we dive into the code, let's understand what rate limiting is and the use cases for it. Rate limiting is simply a technique used to control the number of requests a client can make to an API within a specific time frame. For instance, let's say we have two endpoints, one for login and the other one to get list of products. We can decide that a client should not call the login endpoint more than 6 times per minute, or that the product's endpoint should not be called more than 50 times per minute. That is rate limiting. But the next question is, why do we need this? There are different use cases for rate limiting. I'm going to give you some examples. One of the use cases is to protect applications from brute force attack. This is a situation whereby the attacker is trying to guess authentication credentials or username and password, client credentials, something like that, by trying different combinations of those credentials. Another use case is in tiered API. Imagine that your API has free package and premium package, that is for paid users. You might want to limit the number of requests that a free user can make in a day, say 40 requests per day, whereas a subscribed user can make much more number of requests per day. Rate limiting can also be combined with other techniques to mitigate denial of service attack. This is a situation whereby the attacker bombards your application with too many requests, maybe trying to make it run out of resources and eventually make the application unavailable to genuine users. There are more use cases for rate limiting, but let's leave it at these three and dive into the code. To implement rate limiting in NestJS is straightforward. But before we dive into that, let me explain my setup here. This is a new NestJS project. I've only modified this controller to add two endpoints for demonstration. One called authenticate and the other one to get products. These are just dummy data. Then on the client, I'm using Postman on the client side. I have this, I don't really need this guy. I have the two endpoints. This is the authenticate and the other one that says product. Basically, what we are sending or receiving doesn't matter. We just want to apply limit to the number of requests. But I'm using Postman variables. Storing this variable called count just holds a number. So I can just show you how many times the endpoint has been called. It's not really necessary, just to visualize this. For the other endpoint, there's nothing, just a plain, just hard-coded value being returned. With that in mind, actually, let me start the server and run the application. Call the endpoints, just to show you what I have explained. All right. The application is up and running, and what happens when I send the request, it says attempts 1, send another one 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. And for this, I'm not using that variable here. Okay, let's go ahead and implement rate limiting. To do that, we install the NestJS package, NestJS Throttler. I'll head over to the terminal and npm install NestJS Throttler. The next step after that installation is to go to the module, app module, and configure the limits. So I'll go to app.module.ts. In the import array, we basically import the Throttler module that from the package we just installed, and here we begin to configure the limit. So throttler module.forRoot and this takes an array. Later we are going to see why this array is necessary. So this is what the configuration looks like. TTL is the time frame, the time in milliseconds, and limit is the maximum number of requests a client can make at this given time frame. In this case, this is 60,000 milliseconds, which is the same as 60 seconds. So the limit is 10 requests per 60 seconds, but let me change it to 5. So our demo is going to be easy. The next step after this is to apply throttler guard. And how we do it is, let me go to the providers array. Over here, we are going to apply the guard globally. So I'm going to import from NestJS core and from the throttler module. This will apply to all the routes in the application. What we have so far is basically what you need to get started with rate limiting for your application. Before we dive into the other features and configurations, let's give this a try and see that it works. So what I'm going to do is to make sure that when I send more than 5 requests in 60 seconds, that is 1 minute, there should be an error. This error is going to return a status code of 429, indicating there are too many requests. So I will go over to this. Let me reset this to 0, just for us to see it, to visualize it. I'm going to send the first request. What happened? Okay, restart the server. Run. And the application is running. I'm going to send request 1, no issue, 2, no issue, 3, no issue, 4, 5, no issue. But when I send the 6th one, I will get 429, too many requests. So our throttler, our rate limit works. One thing to take note of here is that the limit applies uniquely to each route. That means the limit for this route does not affect the count of the limit for this route. For example, to make it clearer, if I still send another request, you can see I'm still getting 429, but I can come over to the other endpoint. I have no issue, of course, until I exceed the limit. Now I've exceeded the limit in the other endpoint, and the 429 error is returned. What that means is that I cannot make additional requests to this endpoint, to each of these endpoints, until 1 minute has passed for each of them since the last time I made the request. By the way, to quickly clear this limit when you are developing, you can just restart the server. The next feature we are going to look at is multiple rules for the rate limit. Let me adjust this to something, let's say 50 requests per minute. So why is this multiple rules useful? Right now, what we have is that in 1 minute, that is 60 seconds, clients can make 50 requests. 50 requests in 1 minute. The same thing as 50 requests per minute. But there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. That gives us 3,000 requests per hour. And in a day, there are 24 hours. That means a client can make 72,000 requests to each endpoint in 24 hours. For your APIs, 72,000 requests per day for each endpoint might be too high, too much. And this is where the multiple rules is very useful. What we can do is that, let me revert this to 5 to make it easy for us to test. So we have these 5 requests per minute. We can decide that in 24 hours, the client can make a maximum of 200 requests in 24 hours. So this is times 60 seconds makes 1 minute, 60 minutes makes 1 hour, 24 hours in a day. With this second configuration here, we are limiting the client to 200 requests per day. Of course, this still applies. How can we test this? Well, since we have already seen that configuration like this works, what we need to do is to focus our test on this. By the way, you have to, when you have multiple configurations like this, you have to give it names. You have to give them names. Let me call this base or default, whatever. You can call it anything you want. And for this one, let me call it extended. Give it the name extend. Oh, let's type something here. What the heck? Okay, now that we've understood why this is useful, I'm going to reduce the number of the hours and the limit so we can easily test it. For example, we are not going to wait 24 hours just to test this. So I'm going to change this one to 60 seconds and request limit, let's say 7. Then for this, I'm going to change the limit to 3 and number of seconds to, let's say, actually, to make sure that this doesn't interfere with this one, because once we exceed the limit here, this will trigger. What I'm going to do is to set 1 second 2 requests. That is maximum of 2 requests per second. Of course, I'm not going to click that fast, so this will not trigger. I will make sure of that. But here, we can see that we can make up to 10 requests. Let me set it to 10 in 60 seconds. So I'll go over to Postman and let me reset this to 0. I will also make use of a timer so we can visualize this. I've started the clock. I'll click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If I click the next one, I will get that throttler, the too many request error. When I click the 10th one, was the 11th one, the time was about 18 seconds. And we said not more than 10 requests in 60 seconds. That is 1 minute. We can do one more test before we move to the next thing. So let me change this to 20 seconds. And over here, I'm going to stop and reset this clock and also reset this. Okay. And I'll start this again. Send 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'll click the next one and we are under 20 seconds. Click 10 and we get the exception. And of course, if you keep your request below 10 actually, in 20 seconds, you will not get this exception. So the 429 response here confirms that when we exceed 10 requests in 20 seconds, we get too many request response. Another thing we can do is to skip throttling for specific endpoints. You can choose to skip throttling for getting the list of products. You can also skip for all the endpoints in a given controller. And to do that, we make use of the skip throttle decorator, like that. To make the testing easier, I'm going to change to a limit of 1 request per 5 seconds. I'll head over to Postman and try to send more than 1 request per 5 seconds. 5 seconds here, and we'll see that throttling is not going to apply for all the endpoints in that controller, which are these two endpoints. So I will just send a request, send another one, send. Okay. The reason skip throttle did not work for the routes in this controller is because we have named rules here. When you have named rules like this, you have to specify the one you want to skip. For example, we can skip the base, say base true, like this. And when I go back, let me comment this one out so it doesn't interfere. We have only one here called base. Let's start with not changing this. So even if you have only one, you still have to specify the name. But let's test this. What will happen is that the throttling will still apply because we didn't specify the name, so it still applies. But I'll come over here and say which one to skip. The one named base. Oh, not like that. Just say base true, like that. Now the throttling is disabled for all the routes in that endpoint. So this is the other route, no throttling. Let me restore this, and with the second one restored, the only one that will be skipped is this one, the one we specified the name. Unless we specify the other one, I think extended. There's no need to do that. So when we go back to Postman and try the endpoint, we will notice that the second one we still be working as expected. I think I'll have to send up to 10 times. I didn't start the attempts 10, by the way. That is the count. So the second one still works. Now let's look at the next feature. Imagine that you have, let me comment this one out so we can focus on one. So let's say we have a maximum of 60 requests or 80 requests per minute per 60 seconds. And you look at the login endpoint, the authentication endpoint, and you feel like this default of 80 requests per minute is too much for authentication endpoint. What you can do is to go to the authentication endpoint and override that default. How we do that is simple. We just use this throttle decorator and set new values for the endpoint. So over here I'm going to say throttle and make sure to import that. Let me comment out this skip throttler. Here, instead of limit of 80 per minute, I'm going to set a limit of, let's say, 4 per minute. I will go back here and let's start with the get product endpoint, which doesn't have that override. I'm going to send 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Of course, 80 is the default limit. No issues. But when I go to this authentication endpoint and try to send more than 4, I'll get 429. That is within a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth one. Oh, I missed it again. So again, you have to specify. You have to give it a name because we have a name here. The name is base. So I have to say base is the one that I am overriding, and the limit is 4. Okay, so I'll go back and try the two endpoints again. The one to get product, no issues. I can have up to 80 requests per minute. But this one for authentication, I cannot have more than 4 per minute. So let's give this a try. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the fifth one, we get the 429. Okay guys, so far we have covered quite a number of things on how to implement rate limiting for your REST API in NestJS project. There are still more things you can do. There are other features of this package. I encourage you to take a look at the official documentation to learn more about all the things you can configure. I hope this lesson makes sense. Until next time, enjoy coding.